Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to use a new nature set here. It's the leaves and specifically deciduous types of leaf set here that's going to kind of expand the foreground type of area of a scene, but these stamps can also be used independently from other midground, background types of stamps. And this is nature set number 29, and it's just called leaves. Okay, on this set here we have various types of leaves. There's a birch, maple, alder, hickory branches, and hopefully they will give us kind of a more specific option for those foreground choices you might employ in your scenes. You know, in the past I've kind of gone with a more generic approach for my foreground imagery to not only frame but to a scene, but to also give it a lot more kind of a depth of field, a field of focus for your pieces. Alright, now I've sped this video up 2 times just to so it's not so painful a watch here, but what I'm describing here is just what I've just talked about. It's giving kind of options for like that stamp that I just held up, which was the Autumn Brook stamp, and those are supposed to be some deciduous trees kind of intermixed you know, with oscillating with evergreen trees. So in the past I've used things like oak branch and I don't know, I have this just general leaves stamp, and that worked fine, okay? But you know, in order to kind of really expand on the options of foregrounds, like in this set right here, the set 29, I have the maple leaves, and instead of just going with a usually my use of dark values for that foreground, what I've done is I've created these leaves in a fairly solid format that can be colored, so we can now have a more varied foreground color scheme that can be a visual lead-in and color scheme oh, I don't know what you would call it, it would carry color scheme continuity between foreground and your main scene. So anyways, what I'm doing here is I'm taking some pens. I really love doing direct to rubber coloring because I can get a variety of colors just inherent in my impressions themselves. A lot of people haven't used solid types of imagery. They're more of the types of imagery that you use as an outline and then you color it in. But this is the way that we used to do a lot of coloring back in the 80s, and I would say even through the mid 90s, kind of the late 80s. Well, anyone that was stamping before, then we didn't have pads through about, I would say about the mid 90s, 93, 94 or so, when raised dye base pads started coming out. So everyone colored like this with markers. Okay, now you don't have to use just solely markers. You can do, get your base color on with a pad and just do a little embellishment with one of the pens. Let's say you use a red ink pad, but then you put on a little bit of color with an orange or something like that. So it could just be two colors or something of that sort. But if you have kind of more colors of a spectrum, you can really alter things and adjust them. So here goes the maple leaves right here. So we can have that varied type of look, and that would be a really fantastic option for any maple tree scenario that you might stamp out, any kind of deciduous fall color type of thing. Okay, so we can go with some additional depth here too. So I've colored the first layer, which is it's going to be the background layer of your foreground. So if you want to go with darker leaves like that, these ones would represent the leaves that are either darker inherently or they're in the shadows or shade. So what you're doing is you're kind of creating light within that foreground space, which creates a lot of extra depth. And again, it creates that color scheme continuity with what you'll have going on in the background. I think these leaves look really fantastic too, just as is. So you can stamp in some sort of, you can create a perimeter with these leaves. And you can have the background, or the center area as a sky, or how about put a quote in the middle there? Maybe a quote on autumn or something like that, or even happy birthday. And let's say someone has a fall birthday, or you're someone that likes fall colors. They love, that time of year. You can kind of customize your, I don't know, frame or something like that and put happy birthday in the center there or anything like that. But here we go. I've stamped with a VersaFine Clair those black leaves like that. So those ones are really in the shadows, but it's also contrasting against the lighter ones. So you create a lot of lighting kind of opportunities within that kind of shallower space, which we would, know as foreground. Okay, now on this one right here, I'm just going to stamp out the covered bridge. It's the larger version. And what I'm doing is I'm just using these pens while they're out to bring in some additional color to those trees in the background. Those trees in the background are kind of designed more to stamp them out and to add your color in, but if you can get some color inherently in the impression itself, it really gives you a nice head start. So I just inked it up with a darker brown, then I'm going into it and mixing in some of those same colors that I colored the leaves, the overhanging leaves with. And hopefully some of that color translates into this impression that I'm making now. A lot of times it's hard to tell what exactly these impressions are going to look like when you mix so much colors into it, because you might have one pen that's a little bit drier than the other, so the wetter one kind of dominates the print itself. And you can color things up with the pens the same way so many times, and you get a different look. But there's the browns and the little bit of that reddish tinge in there. And that will be colored later. Okay, now one of the things I didn't mention is I'm stamping all of the pieces I do in this video on a paper that's a cardstock, and it's really close to matte cardstock, so you can use matte cardstock. You can also do these on glossy if you want that glossy look, but I just wanted to I haven't used my colored pencils in a while, so I wanted to have some stamp sketches that I could finish off with colored pencil, or, you can also use different types of dye-based inks and whatever you want on this type of cardstock, but this is the white coated silk by Mohawk, and it's the white coated silk everyday digital 100-pound cover. You don't find that online too much. Kelly Paper has that in all their warehouses, if they have it in their warehouse. They're having a really hard time finding paper goods like anyone these days. But you can call in and get it that way. But there's also I have it written up in our information section in the materials FAQ or the off-site accessories links. And anytime I find some sources for these types of materials I'm using, you can utilize those or use them as a starting point for your research. But at Kelly Papers, you can also just call in an order to any of their stores if you can't find it on their website and just ask them if they have it. Any of their stores should accommodate you. They have really fantastic customer service. Okay, so with these maple leaves here, what I'm doing is I'm creating kind of more of a spring type of scenario here. So I've colored these green right here. So I went with the darker ones first. And what I'm doing here is I'm going in and I'm going to do the lighter ones because it occurred to me, I think I need some more yellow-green tinges in there. So you can see that variation on the rubber itself, so it should translate onto the paper like that. See that yellow and the variations of green and the darker green and lighter green. And sometimes I'll go for, the second or third impression just to get lighter impressions, which look farther away from us, so we can get a lot of depth right within this foreground space like that, okay? So that, and it looks like you're standing under a maple tree looking out at whatever we end up stamping in here. And again, I think these would look fantastic just as is. With a word stamp or something like that to fill out space. It looks like I'm going to use the Autumn Brook here. And what I'm doing on this one is I'm coloring it with black, and then I use a green pen to bring some of those greens into those deciduous trees in the background. It's not to get kind of a full value or color scheme impression, but it just gives you a head start for when you use additional media to flesh out the color scheme after printing, okay? There's a lot of open space in deciduous types of designs, and that's to give you the option of what you want to color it with. You stamp it out and you color it in with, a nighttime type of scenario, moonlight blues or something like that. This one right here happens to be kind of more of your spring, so I'm doing greens here. Although those are greens right there. I mean, you could, I wouldn't do it, after stamping those maple leaves up there, but you could stamp out that Autumn Brook there and still, even though I use greens, you could use more of your fall types of color tones and schemes. Okay, but there are two scenarios there with the fall and spring. And we have that bottom portion down there. I mean, you could bring in some extra leaves down there, but I think that would be a little bit redundant from, kind of that heavy use of all the maple leaves up top. So I'm just going to create this kind of base area, and this is the tiny rocks, just to fill in that extra area there with texture. And then we'll just go with my kind of more general go-to foreground stamp in the reeds large, like that. And that creates a good foundation for our other colors to come. I don't get around to the coloring in this video. I mean, you can almost just, there's a lot of color within those foreground stamps right there. Impressions. You can almost just leave it as is, but I think it always looks better with a little bit of color embellishments too. A lot of color embellishments if you want to. And again, I just wanted to leave the options open for me for things like colored pencils on this, in these sketches here. Okay, this is the hickory. It's specifically a shagbark hickory leaf. And I have a shagbark hickory stamp, or two of them, the small and large one, but I just called it hickory. You want to keep these titles of these stamps fairly simple and short. But we have the left and right side, so it looks like, you can have them coming in from both left and right side if you want to. But again, there's that variation there within the impressions themselves, so it really gives you a head start in terms of, your color scheme and lighting, you know. If you go with say I go with a dark bottle green, and then with this Marvy brush marker, it's the 1500 series, what I'm doing is I'm coloring in, but what I'm doing is I'm kind of lifting some of that bottle green off of the stamp itself, okay? So it just depends. I mean, it's not the same technique with every pen and every pad. You might have a very dry pen and very wet pen, and that's going to take a little bit, you know, of a different type of approach to coloring. You'll get the feel of it. Sometimes both pen and pad are super juicy, you know, where if you ink up with the pad, it's really hard to remove some of that ink with a lighter, in this case, green, because there's just so much ink on both of them. So sometimes, I don't know, you might have to even like dab off a little bit of the color that you apply with a pad, if you use a pad, or, you know, if you're using two juicy pens, whatever. You might have to dab off a little bit with a paper towel, then color in that space with whatever color you're embellishing it with. In this case, it's a lighter version of green. It's a lighter value of green. Okay, going on the left and right side, you can see I kind of staggered it a little bit so that it's not so mirrored of a left and right side, and it's a lot more varied that way. Just so it doesn't look so mirrored and symmetrical and thus monotonous. So a couple different impressions with the right side one on the right side, and then the left side one I go kind of low and high with it. A little bit more, I guess separated, not so overlapped. And this is the watermill large stamp. Okay, so again, I inked this one up in black, and I'm doing that same embellishment of green. It's kind of an olive green, and to hopefully get some of that green in those background trees in there. Okay, now here I'm kind of wondering where I should stamp it out, because we have those fairly large leaves in the foreground, and if I have those leaves right in front of the main area of the watermill, we're going to be losing a lot of the watermill features, so I'm just saying, you know, kind of adjust accordingly. In reality, I mean, this is about the nature set 29 and the imagery. That's why I'm kind of stamping those first. But in reality, it's really better to go with the watermill first, because that's the main image in the scene, and to work around it. But I wanted to show the coloring types of options and techniques on just a white piece of paper instead. Okay, that was the water pattern small, getting that water texture down there. And this is the cloud cumulus, and I'm stamping a lighter blue. But again, dye-based inks are transparent, so I can just stamp it right over those leaves, and it's not as if the cloud is going to look like it's in front of the leaves. Anything dark is always going to seem the closest to us. And I'll fill that in. I'm not sure what I'm going to fill in that space to the left of the watermill until I get to it. When I start coloring. I was thinking about an extra leaf down there, but I'll probably do something with that. I don't know, I'll probably put some background trees in there. And the anchoring, very generic but very effective, reads large like that. See that? We have all those pieces going in there. What those larger leaves too kind of create is you don't have to do so much coloring and whatnot. Because those leaves really fill in that space. And normally the background and main image, you know, we do a lot of coloring, but we're taking care of that in kind of large applications of designs. So that really takes care of a lot. So I don't know, it's these leaves and foreground. I mean, I've been using foreground forever, but it's, you know, it's causing me to kind of think of things a little bit differently. It's a small tweak, I guess you can say. It's not like a big, vast change, but just the fact that we can have so much color in the foreground itself now is, for me, it's not any insignificant type of oh, I don't know, maybe consideration here. Okay, these are the alders right here. You can use these alders right here. They're, they'd be perfect. Let's say some people already had the birch trunks and they like that birch tree set that's new. I use the same trunks that I had before, but some people, already have them. But they like those leaves that come on that set, which are birch leaves. But these alder ones would work just fine too. They even have like the same or a similar type of tree seed pod. Okay, now in there, what I do is I use my brown. I didn't really do too much altering of the leaf color by varying it, but what I did is, just to show you can expedite it, I just inked up this entire leaf with a green. Now here I'm going for some variation, but I just used that same brown that I've used before, in this video, to color the stem portion, the branch portion of the image. Okay, so see, that one's a little bit of a darker impression, and I have that little varied leaf where it looks like there's some light on it. Now here, this is what I'm using my VersaFine Clair. The VersaFine Clair you can use on, your matte cardstocks. You can't really use it on glossy because it's not going to dry. But here, I love VersaFine Clair because it's just so dark and deep and rich. And what we'll do is we'll go with the left and right side of it here. But see, look at all that depth right within the foreground. I love having all that depth within there. I've done it before using the reeds large. I'll stamp it in whatever color scheme I'm doing. Greens, black, lighter green, to create depth in the foreground. But it's a very thin image. These ones are much more prominent in terms of that color scheme, and thus the color scheme transitions. Okay, so there's your dark impression. Now I'm going with a lighter impression, just using the pen here. One of the things with this too, a little tweak here, or a little tip, I colored that whole stamp using that green, okay? Instead of just coloring the leaves green and the branch brown. Sometimes if you do that, it looks too unrelated, so I'm going with the greens over the whole thing. Now I went in with the brown afterwards, right over the green. And then I added a little bit more green over it, but, I just left the brown alone. But that brown's kind of a mixture of green and brown together. And that creates, it's a very subtle continuity between branch and leaf. It creates a relationship between them. And again, I don't know if someone would notice it like, oh my gosh, that brown looks so different than that green or something like that. I don't think people are going to say that, but any of those little types of things like that just kind of make things a little bit more, I don't know, seamless in terms of your color blends by doing it. And it's easier to do that too if you don't have to work around something. You just color the whole thing up with one color, and then you come back in with the other color and go right over the top of it. And that way you also know that you don't miss anything. Okay, so there's a lot of variety in here. I would say that there's kind of 3 or 4 distinct values within those leaves themselves, meaning kind of a lighter color, medium, and darker. And there's different subtle variations within there, but it's really exciting for me to have that type of thing in a scene, especially for something that, I've been stamping a very long time. And it's all about refinement and tweaks and even kind of subtle growth in terms of an approach to a composition, but when you can kind of really introduce something fairly impactful, I would say more refined, certainly, because of the choices we have. And from there, the choices, the selection that we can do as a result of all that, from a creativity standpoint, our options just go up exponentially, I would say, because of those colors in there. If it's something like the reeds, you're not going to create, like 5 variations of a certain color within that impression. You could, but it would be barely visible. But now in something like these, you can see, there's, I don't know, maybe that would go, those greens go from something like a 40% green, those secondary impressions, to maybe an 80% green, which is almost, it's not almost black, but it's looking very dark. Okay, this is the smaller wing nut leaves. So this is the larger and smaller version of that. That's on the set, and I'm just creating that perimeter pattern there. As I was doing this, I was thinking about maybe those quote stamps, or kind of that idea. And here goes the VersaFine Clair. So look at this. We're going all the way to 100%, and look at the depth that creates. I'm kind of trying to avoid stamping directly over a previous impression and just kind of interspersing this in there. But look at all that depth right in there. You can make some kind of, maybe not the size here, but you can do like little name tags or something like that, or place settings, anything like that. There you have it right there. It's that VersaFine Clair. You can almost create kind of a nice framing device with just those darker impressions around there like that. But then again, you have the benefit of all that color. Okay, and this one's the final one here. This one is the aspen, or not the aspen, but the birch leaves. This one's a really large one. It would have been great to include this with the birch tree set, but that set is just absolutely loaded with imagery. I'm trying to fill up as much space on the sets as I can, and this is the one that I had space for, so it really brings something very close to us. So I'd say these other branches so far that you've seen, they probably represent leaves that might be, let's say, if we were in the scene themselves, it would represent something that might be 1 foot to 4 feet away from us. I don't know, maybe not that, maybe 1 to 3 feet away, if we were looking at it. But these ones right here, these leaves, it would be as if we were standing and looking at the leaves from, I don't know, a few inches away, I guess. And again, I'm going for variations here. And you can see that in the impression itself, it's almost fisheye, but it's giving it that texture in there. But it's because I'm stamping wet into wet. I didn't take time to heat set that and let it dry, which you can do for a more solid impression, but I happen to like that, in this case at least, that kind of fisheye, kind of watercolory look, of that little separation that's happening within the impression, where it's kind of puddling. So I don't know, I like texture, and it's giving me that little extra texture. It was kind of an unanticipated one, and again, I can avoid it if I want to just by drawing the previous impressions, but it just comes to show you how solid these images are, and how much ink they hold, and thus transfer onto the surface of whatever surface you're using, cardstock. I don't know, I'll try these on foil sometime in different colors. And those last two, the alder and the birch leaves, I didn't finish off anything with a main scene like the first 3. But we could stamp something underneath these overhanging limbs, something that would be, I don't know, kind of natural to those leaves. And I don't know, I think we'd get a lot of variation in there. I'm excited about doing any kind of stamp sketches whenever I get some new designs. But I really love finishing scenes off with, my white pigment ink effects, white paint pen, colored paint pens, I don't know, light beams coming through these leaves. I think that would be fantastic with that alder one there on the lower left-hand corner. This one right here could have a light beam coming down through those hanging shagbark hickory leaves, shining down onto the top of that watermill. I think that would be really dramatic. But again, having this varied value impression, I don't know, I think it looks really cool in terms of the light. I was thinking more in terms of framing, but when you actually see these being used in application, overlapping, the changing of colors and the layers. Some things, other things kind of open up to you in terms of kind of what they can represent. In this case, it's not only framing distance in terms of foreground, but also lighting because of that, the varied values you can employ either with the use of layered colors coming straight out of an ink pad or your pens. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm looking forward to finishing these off. And thanks as always for tuning into the Stampscapes channel. We'll see you on the next video.